Hello and welcome to the podcast According to Sci-Faith, where we discuss topics revolving around the compatibility of science and faith. I'm Joshua Göcking and you're listening to According to Sci-Faith. Episode 50, Kaluza-Klein-Theory. So we want to talk about a theory which was established in the 20s. And in this time, there were basically the two big theories that were around was Einstein's theory of general relativity, of gravity basically, and electromagnetism. Those were the big theories. At this time, quantum mechanics was coming about, so this we will talk about a little bit later. But these were the great theories at this time, and there was already the endeavor to combine them into one theory. And how they tried to do this was, this was the work of Kaluza and Klein, both German physicists who worked on this separately or without knowing of each other. And so they were trying to do this, and what Kaluza did was he introduced a new dimension. So we have, if you know general relativity or special relativity also, there we have space-time basically. So we know that time is just a dimension, just like space itself, and therefore we expand this expand space, three-dimensional space. We expand it into a four-dimensional space-time, so three space dimensions and one time dimension. And what Kaluza said is that he would expand this this space-time by one spatial dimension. So instead of three spatial dimensions and one time dimension, he would now have four spatial dimensions and one time dimension, and it took altogether then 5 dimensions. And with this change, he could unify or put together the equations of Maxwell, the Maxwell equations of electromagnetism, and Einstein's field equations, which are basically the formulation of general relativity. And with this he could bring this together, so it seems like the problem is solved, right? Yeah, however, of course you have the next problem that if you look around yourself, you see that we apparently do not live in a 5-dimensional world. We live in 3 spatial dimensions and 1 time dimension, so a 4-dimensional world, but not a 5-dimensional world. So this could work if we would live in 5 dimensions, but since we do not, this seems to be a big contradiction. So what you do is you do not reject the theory just because of this minor detail, but you try to solve it, you try to rescue it. And this was what Klein tried to do. So he said, okay, we have this dimension that we do not see in nature, and we do not see it in nature not because it is not present, but because it is compactified, it is rolled up. Like you can imagine this or you can envision this like a straw. If you have a straw, like to drink, you have the straw, and if you imagine an ant walking on the straw, it can walk around it. So for the ant, it's a 2-dimensional area. But if you are really far away from the straw and you look from a distance, then it basically looks like a 1-dimensional object. You would think, okay, you can go up and down the straw, but not around it because it's so small. It's just a 1-dimensional object. And this is basically the idea behind it, that these dimensions are kind of rolled up like a straw, and this so tightly with such a small radius that we cannot even see it anymore. So the radius that is proposed there is much smaller than atomic diameter, so we cannot even resolve it in any way. And with this, you would have resolved this problem. However, as I said, about the same time, quantum mechanics was becoming more and more present, and each theory that was developed in this time to really have consistent stability, to really be a theory that could survive for a long time, it needed to be quantized. You need to have a quantum formulation of this theory, because since quantum mechanics is occurring at the atomic level, any theory of matter needs to take this into account, needs to take these quantum effects into account. And the way to do this is basically by quantizing a theory. This is how you basically call it. And this is not as simple as it may sound like, because not every theory can actually be quantized. So there is, since this is not only quantum mechanics anymore, this is already quantum field theory, where you already try to combine special relativity with quantum mechanics, and then you have these quantum fields and so on, and you have this theory of quantum fields. And the interesting fact that comes about then is that in these theories you will have infinities occurring, so results of your calculations will tend to go to infinity, which doesn't make any sense, and you need to kind of resolve that. And there are mathematical ways to do that, to get rid of these infinities, but this does not work for any theory. So there are certain theory for which this is possible, and theories for which this is not. So this whole mechanism of getting rid of those infinities is called renormalization. And a theory for which you can do that, for a theory where you can renormalize the results, is called renormalizable. And such theories can be quantized, basically. Okay, time for a short break. In this break, I just shortly want to mention other products that you can have except for this podcast. So for once, if you want to really learn more about the Sci-Faith podcast, I really recommend to you to get my book, Sci-Faith, The Compatibility of Science and Faith, which is available in English as an ebook. You can order it at Amazon. I really encourage you to read it, to get a deeper insight into the ideas behind Sci-Faith, how science and faith can be combined, how they are compatible, and in which way you can find this or combine them to each other. Also, if you like reading novels, especially if you're interested in science fiction, I recommend to you my book Alien Thoughts, which is also about technical topics. Also, these ideas of Sci-Faith are baked into this book, and many other ideas. Basically, the whole story of the gospel is told in a way in a science fiction story. So if you are interested in this, I really recommend it to you. This is also available as an ebook, also in English. And I also have, if you are familiar with the German language, I also have a new crime novel. It's called the Odysseus-Liste, where it is about basically a murder that needs to be, or it looks like a suicide, and it needs to be resolved. And there are many also interesting points in it about open source technology and so on. And also it has this idea behind Sci-Faith that you also find in my book, Sci-Faith, The Compatibility of Science and Faith. It's also in there. So I'm always, when I'm writing these books without this intention of putting these ideas into it, I'm always astonished that later I find that they still are in this, because those are basic principles, and I think it's interesting how they come up basically everywhere in every story and so on. And if you are interested in this, it's a pretty short book. You need to be able to read German, of course. It's only 75 pages or something, so it's a quick read, but it's also really exciting. And a really nice story, I think, and this you can also order at Thalia. And I'm looking into, maybe I can do an English version of this. I see what I can do, and if so, then I will announce it as soon as it is possible. Maybe also the books I mentioned right now, except for the last one, they are only available as ebooks. Maybe I will convert them into a print version that you can also get a print version of this. If you would be interested in this, if you say, I really would like to read those books, but I only read print versions, then let me know. Then I know there is a demand for that, and then I will try to put more effort into this endeavor. And if you have any kind of feedback to my books, or want to write a review, or want to get in touch with me, and you can always use the contact form at my webpage, sci-faith.de/en. I really like to hear from you and get any feedback from you, and also ideas for new podcast episodes and so feel free to contact me at any time. So the problem is that this is not possible for this theory that Kaluza-Klein had, and therefore after some work on this was not really they did not really work on this anymore for a long time. Only in the 80s it was picked up again, because then string theory was coming around, and there they also make big use of these dimensions, of compactified dimensions, as we have seen with this rolled up straw. This is basically what they make use of there. There they of course have a lot more dimensions, as we have seen in the podcast episode to string theory. And there's the result of this compactified dimensions are really interesting. So one result of this is, if you have such a compactified dimension as in this straw, as you see, basically every object that moves in this dimension, or that can move in this dimension, will have kinetic energy, of course. I mean, if I have an object in these 3 dimensions that I see, but actually there are some more dimensions. Let's just stick with 1 dimension. There's 1 more dimension in which it can move, and let's say it rotates like the end around the straw. It rotates around this compactified dimension. Then it basically has kinetic energy, right? So it's moving, and therefore it has energy. It has this kinetic energy. However, if I look at an object, since I don't see this other dimension, to me it seems like the object would be at rest. And if you look into the equation, if you calculate it through, you will see that this leads to this object to acquire mass. So to me, as somebody who does not see this dimension, it looks like this object that is moving in this other dimension has mass. It's heavy. There is a gravitational pull to it. And this is a result of this. And this follows directly out of general relativity. So this you can also, I think, say it like this, that mass in this sense is just a movement from another dimension, or in another dimension, which to us seems like mass. And I think this can be interpreted also in the spiritual in an interesting way, because for one thing, it shows that there is nothing that is really at rest. I mean, you already have this in special and general relativity, that there is basically no system that is at rest in relative to everything, because there is no absolute system. Everything needs to be considered relatively to each other. For example, if I drive with a train to Berlin, then I will feel myself at rest and think all the trees and street signs and so on are moving past me. But somebody who's standing outside will think that the street signs and the trees are all at rest, and he himself is at rest, but I am moving past them with the train. And you might say, okay, but the one who's standing outside, he's more on the right, because let's face it, the train is moving. However, then you can say, okay, but the Earth is moving around the sun and so on, so he also is moving. He's also not at rest. And then you can also say our solar system is moving in this galaxy. So you will not ever find, this is basically a statement of special relativity, you will not ever find a rest frame which is absolutely at rest and not only at rest relatively to some other rest frame or some other frame of reference. And this is basically always doing this. Therefore, you can always say there's nothing that is really at rest, or there's nothing of which you can say that it is really at rest. But here you have even more than that. You have these objects that are at rest in their rest frame, in their frame of reference. They are still can be moving in one dimension, which in a rest frame where you would see relatively to it other movements, you would still not see this movement, since it is in a dimension that you cannot really detect. And therefore this shows that even there you can see that everything is moving, nothing is really at rest. And this also shows that God is not at rest. God is not resting. It says in the Bible several times that he's not of course, on the as it says in the story of creation, on the Sabbath he was also resting. That's not the kind of rest I'm talking about. I mean, what I mean by that is that God is always on the move. He's always on the move. He's always moving forward. He's always always at work, basically, not in a way that he does not come to rest, but I think you get what I mean. But and what you also can see from this, that this mass gets from this movement in this other dimension. So this kinetic energy from this other dimension basically leads to mass in this world where we do not see these dimensions, basically. And this mass holds together the world. So dark matter, normal matter, and so on are basically in such a setting that they hold each other together, that the universe does not collapse in itself, but also not expand into nothingness, and so on, that this is just in a balance. And this is achieved by these masses, and this mass comes from this kinetic energy in these other dimensions. So God moving in this other dimension can therefore in the spirit be seen also that this leads to mass, leads to a heaviness, leads to an attraction towards him, that we are pulled closer to him, that he wants to pull us closer to him, and that it gives this world mass, it gives this heaviness, it gives it also matter, so that it matters, that something of importance, a meaning, and so on. And I think this is also something that you can spiritually interpret these Kaluza-Klein-Theory in the spiritual, what you can interpret this to be. And I think in some sense you can also say that this theory, although it is not really or for a long time was not really helpful, and you might be doubtful about string theory, but still, even if these theories do not pan out to be good theories and there are better theories to describe it, I think the principle that there might be in principle other dimensions in which these particles move and this leads to mass, I think as long as you put the parameters correctly, this can always be a worldview that you can have of nature. This is also always something I think that you can view nature to act like. Of course, it might not be always helpful as a scientific theory, but especially if you like this spiritual interpretation of that, I think this can be, you can basically say that this can be an alternate worldview to the ones on alternate theory to the ones that we have. And if the parameters are chosen correctly, this can always be in accordance with the facts. And therefore, I think this is a pretty interesting theory with also a pretty interesting interpretation. So that's everything for today's episode. I hope you liked it and you enjoyed each part of it. If you want to get in touch with me or discuss a topic or want to give me some feedback, then feel free to contact me using the contact form on my website, sci-faith.de/en. And there you can go to the contact tab and contact me. And if you have any other things or episodes you want to have covered there or topics you want to have covered, feel free to contact me there. Also, if you are not yet familiar with the format in which this podcast is produced, let me just briefly explain it to you. So there is always at the beginning of a month or of a block, there is a big block of 4 episodes in one thing. It's kind of like a preview, which I call it, where you have the next 4 episodes all in one episode together, combined. And this is for people who like to hear long format podcasts, who have a long way to work or something else, where they can listen to a long episode and can then have a preview of the next 4 episodes all at once, and are completely up to date from the beginning of the block. For those who like their episodes shorter, who prefer it if they have a half an hour or even less of a podcast episode, for those there is every week afterwards will appear a podcast episode almost in that length, and this way I can publish every week a new podcast every episode, and everyone can have it his own way, either once a month a long chunk of content, or once a week a shorter format podcast episode. So I think that's the best way for everyone, and also for me when I'm producing it. Please also note that this is an independent podcast, which means that it is recorded, produced, and marketed by me. So I really need your support in this. So if you like this podcast, then give it a 5-star rating. And if you have the time, even write a review to it. This just helps other listeners to become aware of this podcast. And then people who might be interested in this content can become aware of it. Also, if you have friends who you think would like this content, then recommend it to them and share it with them. Also, you can support me in other ways, for example by reading my blog and subscribing to my newsletter, or even by reading my books, which you can find on Amazon. For example, there is my latest novel out now is Alien Thoughts, which is pretty entertaining from the feedback that I gotten, and so it's also in some way related to science and faith. The topic of it is also in there, but of course you can also read the book to this podcast, Sci-Faith, The Compatibility of Science and Faith, which is also available in English since last year. Thank you for that. And now I wish you a wonderful day, and I'm looking forward for you to tune in again next time.